Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology.
Hi there.
Hi there.
It is a good morning.
It is a good morning.
I'm loving this morning. We worshipped online at 7 a.m.
We did.
Which was lovely, and you were in fine voice.
Thanks.
Which I so appreciate.
For 7 a.m., it's always a roll of the dice.
Well, it is. It is. It is.
Yeah, today felt okay.
It was a good day. So we are presenting an interview we did with Judge Tim Fall not very long ago.
Yes, we are. This is an interview that we did with Tim just as the sheltering in place was starting up. So it's been a couple of months now. Mm-hmm. Tim is a judge up in Sacramento, and originally we had planned to meet in person.
We had.
In his hometown of Davis, but because of sheltering in place, we ended up doing it on Zoom. You'll notice that our voices are not quite as clear and spectacular as they are right now on the recording, just because we were still getting used to some of the technology, and Zoom tends to make voices sound a little more tinny than you're used to. So just be aware of that. But enjoyed our conversation. Learned a lot about what it means to be a judge, what that looks like. Tim is an excellent encourager, kind of a pastor-y type, and does a lot of encouraging online on his blog and in his social media.
We talked to him right after the publication of his new book, and we mentioned that a few times in the interview, so you won't miss it. But I encourage you, it's a quick read, and he's just talking about what it was like to run for judge, for reelection, if you will, although that's a story, and to deal with the depression and anxiety that came out of that.
Yes.
It's definitely worth your time, particularly if you've either been in the legal system or have dealt with depression or anxiety. It's a good read, so I highly recommend it.
Or run for an office.
Or if you've ever run for an office, God love you.
Student body president.
Oh, gosh. Oh,
Ladies
God.
auxiliary treasurer.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to go rock over here in the corner. Ladies auxiliary treasurer. Oh, golly.
Yeah, I grew up in a church with a ladies auxiliary.
Oh, my gosh. The first church I ever pastored had an entire set of dishes that was owned by essentially the ladies auxiliary and that no one could use. I was like, okay, I really got nothing here. So make sure you take a look at the book. And if you are listening to us around the 4th of July, which you may be, or just at any time, we encourage you to go take a listen to a podcast we did last year called What Are We Talking About When We're Talking About Patriotism?
Yeah, it's a good one.
And it might be a good one for this season as well.
Here is our interview with Judge Tim Fall.
Well, hey there. We're actually talking to Tim Fall today, whom I discovered on Twitter. And I don't even know how I found you, Tim. You must be a friend of a friend of a contact of a friend of a something. And I saw some post that somebody had retweeted, and then there it is.
I think a lot of people somehow stumble over me, and once I have made them lose their sense of balance, both in thinking and physically, possibly, somehow they stick with me. I apologize for making you stumble over me. Usually, and then what happens is I graciously offer you a hand back up, and you don't realize that it's all been a masterful plot to somehow make a connection online.
See, you did not seem like that kind of skeegy guy to me. And now I have to really just reevaluate my entire impression
I
of you.
think it's genius. I think the whole thing is genius.
You know, a friend of mine told me years and years ago, he was one of my mentors early on, and he said, if you can fake sincerity, you've got it made.
Well, you did a great job of faking sincerity in your book. I just finished reading your book. And,
I'm glad. And it's a quick read now, isn't it?
It is a quick read. But I have to say, as somebody who tends to write as if I were still a philosophy teacher, I really appreciated the fact that it was a quick read, and not in the sense that it's a small book, but it flows very easily. It's very conversational. It's very comfortable. And that's not easy to do. So I personally have admiration for that. The book is Running for Judge. And in it, you are recounting your experiences, both running for election, which is weird because you were appointed as a judge, municipal judge, right, to begin with.
Right.
And then, as you point out, in the state of California, we don't see judges on the ballot unless they're being run against, right? And so suddenly you were being run against for judge, and then you are recounting both the actual running for judge, but also your personal experience of the challenge of doing that, right? So that's the basic book. So what caused you to write this in the first place? I mean, did you just say, wow, I really need to tell people about how to run for judicial office near Sacramento, or how did this all happen?
The idea for the book came both from trying to give some insights in what happens when someone becomes a judge, and I had the benefit of being able to talk about it from the appointment side and have to deal with the challenge that came. It wasn't that I was appointed and then ran to keep my seat. It was that I was challenged 13 years into being a judge. And we have 6-year terms in California. So appointed to the bench, and then I went through one election cycle without a challenger and another election cycle without a challenger. And then finally in the third one, somebody took a flyer at me. And it was the toll that it took, not only what I think is kind of an interesting look at running a judicial campaign, which is different from all the other campaigns you see out there. Anybody running for school board up through running for president gets to be political, and judges don't. We are an elected office, and the only one in the state of California that is completely forbidden from being political, even when we are running for reelection. Just can't do it. It's different from some other states. If you're in Texas, for example, it is completely political. You identify your party and you get party endorsements and party money and all of that. And we can't accept party money. We don't get party endorsements. Yeah, it's a very different system here.
Well, that's because we are pure and good of heart here in California.
Well, yes. Although I will say that it comes out of the progressive movement in the early 1900s, the same movement that took down the monopolies of the railroads, which used to pretty much run politics for a few decades in California, and some of the other big oligarchies. Those were busted through the progressive movement in the early 1900s. It's the same thing that led to the establishment of the courts as being completely nonpartisan in California. And then as I was going through this, it took a toll on me physically and mentally, emotionally. It was an assault on my faith. And that's why the subtitle to the book, it's Running for Judge, Campaigning on the Trail of Despair, Deliverance, and Overwhelming Success. And I'll tell you, there was despair and deliverance in that campaign, that's for sure.
One of the things I noticed about the book was you sort of drop your faith in at various locations rather than it being a constant refrain.
Oh, hey, look, a book by a Christian that doesn't turn into a sermon.
What? Damn it. Okay. But it's interesting to hear what you were saying just now about it being a challenge to your faith as well, because I did not experience that as being a strong piece of the book.
I found that there were times when I could not exercise my faith in the way that I was used to.
Okay.
And other people came alongside and exercised faith for me. In the book, you may remember I talk about my wife extensively, being the one whose strength I had to rely upon. Yes. And there are other people I mention here and there through the book as well who came alongside me like that. She was the one that I relied upon when my own strength was completely depleted. She was there reminding me of God's faithfulness. But I don't talk about it as, oh, and by the way, this is a faith moment, folks.
Right, exactly. I'm glad you pointed out that it didn't turn into a sermon, because it didn't turn into a sermon at all. I think at least a lot of the stuff I've read, people wind up either, it turns into a really bad worship song, right?
Right.
You know, life was horrible, 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 but you were there and you were there and you were there and I was horrible and you were there and I was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was definitely not it. One thing that came through very clearly was at the height of the anxiety and the depth of the depression, sitting in church was painful.
It was extremely painful. And it's because I had way too much time to think.
Yeah.
It led to feeling like I could not participate like I normally would in church. I just kept dwelling on what I was going through. Yeah, the anxiety to actually get the diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder was a bit disorienting. I'd never thought about that as something that I was dealing with until my doctor put a label on it. Panic attacks and depression and were part of going through that season. And one of the pages on my blog is the free ebook that I wrote called On Not Missing My Father. And the subtitle is The Relief of a Parent's Death.
Yes.
My mom died when I was 14. So I have lived a long time without my mother being present. And then my dad, he lives until, let's see, she died when she was 46. And I was the youngest of four. So I was only 14 at the time. Then my dad lives until he's 95. So I was with him a long, long time. And I am the primary person for making sure that he is taken care of. We moved him to an assisted living place that is in our town, very close to our house. Senior assisted living is great. The place he was at, I referred to it as a cruise ship on land. They have program directors and they have restaurant style dining and they do room service and they take you places and there's trips and events and they bring in musicians and all sorts of things going on there. So he had a grand time with all of that, but he also was deteriorating in his health, which meant a whole lot of times that I was having to take him to the doctor's appointments. Everybody grieves differently, and that's the conclusion of that book is about the fact that I'm not missing him doesn't mean I'm not grieving him. It's a grief in a way. And that is also a time, the last 2.5, 3 years of his life, where, again, I went back on the anxiety meds because it was a rough time as far as what's going on with me and in helping him with that.
Of course.
The other piece, staying on the anxiety for a minute, I've dealt with persistent depression most of my adult life and wasn't aware of it at all until I went through a fairly lengthy period of, I would now identify as anxiety, but I wouldn't have then. It was a period of high productivity, right? Because I was sleeping, 3 or 4 hours a night at most and working the rest of the time. I didn't have words for what was going on. And then when I finally realized what was going on, I was like, oh, well, that makes more sense.
Right.
So I appreciated very much in the book and the way you're talking about it now in terms of the passing of your dad or the caring for your dad, it might be a better way to put it, that often we don't even know that we are having mental and physical challenges because they're all connected, right? That we're having those until somebody else says, hey, that's not the way people who are doing okay respond.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the mental illness side because I want to remove the stigma of that. And Renee Branson wrote a great foreword to the book where she talks about this in the legal profession, which for the last 4 years is where her therapy practice has been entirely focused. And I also principally wrote it to be an encouragement, which is where my blog has been at for the last 8 years. And it has been focused upon how do I encourage people through social media. We're in this time right now of shelter in place and stay at home. And it's a time to encourage, even though we can't come alongside each other.
Yes.
The three of us were supposed to be sitting across the table from each other right now having this conversation, and that didn't happen.
Right.
That's really why I wrote the book, why I have my blog, why I do those 2-minute videos every day right now. It's all in order to encourage people and try to come alongside them.
Very much shows in your Twitter feed that is your sense of the people with whom you are speaking. So yeah, that just comes through very, very strongly. I appreciate that a lot.
It does,
And
yeah. Yeah, during this time too, Tim, you mentioned those video blogs are really very encouraging. You come off like a pastor a little bit in these videos, and I mean that in all the nicest possible ways. I think the heart you have for encouraging people really shines in there. And I love the one, it was actually the one that you posted this morning where it was still dark outside. And you were talking about how we're all sort of wandering around in the darkness right now. And I really appreciated that because that's where we all are.
as I was going out, I thought, this is going to be a great metaphor. I am walking in the pre-dawn moments. The twilight was just developing, and I could tell people, you may not be able to see me, but dawn is going to break and light will come after darkness. John 1 is clear. The darkness is there, and then the light comes to shine in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't understand it, or the darkness cannot withstand it, depending on which way you translate the word, because Jesus is the light. In Paul's letters, he talks about that God comforts us and that we have that comfort from God so that we can then comfort others with the comfort that God has given us.
Right.
And that word comfort is the same word that Jesus uses when he talks about the Holy Spirit as our comforter. So in Paul's letter, when he's using the word that we translate as comfort, it is that the God of all coming alongsidedness comes alongside us so that we can come alongside others with the coming alongsidedness that God has given us. That is the comfort. It is coming alongside. But we have that, and that's what I try to do online.
Did you know when you were in law school that you wanted to be a judge?
No. I went to law school thinking that I was going to be an environmental lawyer, that I was going to handle transactional work and not the litigation side.
Okay.
Got into law school, started realizing that litigation looked like it might be good. And so I got a job at a civil firm. At the time, it was fairly big. It has devolved now into a bunch of offshoots from the attorneys who were there. But that's how it actually started as well, as an offshoot. But when I joined it, there were about 55 attorneys there. And for Sacramento, that's a really big firm. So I was at this law firm and I liked the litigation. I really had some great people that I was working with. I liked it. And then I started traveling around the state and I appeared in courtrooms up and down the state, federal and state civil courtrooms. And as I'm doing that, from these little 2-judge courthouses to San Francisco and other really large courts, I started thinking, hey, maybe I could do that. So I put in an application for it. And I had not been a lawyer very long before I put in the application for the bench. Yeah, I didn't practice the law all that long, about 7.5 years as an attorney, and now 25 years as a judge.
Yeah, wow.
They're different personalities.
They certainly are. The head of the team I was on at my firm, he was one of the founding partners. And he said, why do you want to be a judge? I would hate that job. He said, I've sat in as a judge pro tem at the courthouse. And he meant the Sacramento courthouse. And he said, I hated it. At first I was thinking, what do you mean? Why wouldn't I want to do it? It'd be a great job. And then I became a judge. And I realized he was absolutely right. He would have been miserable. It just was not how he was made.
We are never not in a period of spiritual hunger, right? Always there are people who are spiritually hungry. Always there are people who are grappling with the big things and the little things of life.
Right.
They get expressed differently at different times. How's that coming across to you? Where are you seeing that?
I get comments left on the blog sometimes from people who flat out say, I do not believe in God, but I see what you are writing here and want to talk about that. I love those conversations. The other thing that I see with people, and especially on Twitter and Facebook, is a lot of people who have grown up with some sort of faith life, something that you would consider traditional Christian upbringing, perhaps, or as an adult, maybe they came to it, and that's what I did. I came to Christ as an adult. Mm. But they have had to take a long, hard look at what they had once lived in their faith. And some people call it deconstruction. Some people just call it a faith crisis. There are a lot of ways this has been expressed over the years, but people who are saying, I grew up thinking this, and now I'm having to rethink that. Not that they are rethinking a relationship with Jesus, they are rethinking how that is lived.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a podcast of our little nonprofit called School for Seekers. A lot of the students we wind up working with are people exactly like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They've either been liberal or conservative in the way they've understood Christianity or any other faith. It doesn't really matter in this case. And they run into a wall where the paradigm they've been living in and reality hit each other, and they have to make some kind of decision about what they're going to do about that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are usually the people we wind up working with in one way or another. And I don't like talking about deconstruction too much, mainly because the people we work with don't tend to use that language.
Right.
But it really is that whole, what am I going to keep? What am I going to get rid of? And how much am I going to lose if I have to change my mind about something, right? I do a lot of, and have done for a long time, a lot of counseling of folks who are coming out of the closet. And often they'll be very frustrated about a parent who can't come to grips with that, or who hasn't come to grips with it in the first 20 minutes after they've heard that their kid is gay.
Right.
And what I try and help them understand is that for the parent who is not open to this to begin with, to become open to it means that they have to change their entire way of looking at the entire world. It isn't just about their kid. The whole world has now shifted for them.
Right.
And they are changing how they think about their friends, or how they think, I mean, it's everything. What you're talking about is, it's not this little tiny shift in your view.
Right.
It's a huge shift in the way you look at the entire world, and that's painful and hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
You know? So being able to write about these things in a way that helps people see their own opening,
right,
can be just incredibly useful.
Yeah, and some people are fairly set in their ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much that I have in common with those people. If we went through the Apostles' Creed together, every line we'd both be saying, yep, right there. Me too. And so that part's fine. And then you get into the other issues. And I talk about these things with people sometimes online, and they really, really hold fast. And if they get to the point where they then insult my intelligence, and usually it gets pretty blatant by this time, along the lines of, well, if you're not going to believe what Scripture says, or, well, it's clear that you don't care about being intellectually honest with the Word of God. So then I will usually try to sign off. I think it's in 2 Corinthians, but I could be wrong, where Paul is dealing with these things as well. And he has a great turn of phrase. He says, those of us who are mature hold this view, yes, and God will make this clear to you as well. And and so I'll quote that verse and, do then kind of and toodaloo, I'll talk to you later. Because I'm just thinking, we're not convincing each other.
That's right.
We're just not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's fine,
Mm-hmm. What are you finding most challenging or joyful, choose a direction, in your own faith life these days?
The challenge is to stay focused on encouragement. Snark is one of my love languages, and it's too easy to devolve into that. But I find the joy in those times when I am able to do that encouragement, and people respond to it in a way that shows that they have appreciated someone coming alongside them. Also, the everyday things with my wife, for example. And I talk about in the book how we get up every morning and pray together. And we used to pray together at night in bed while we were laying down. And she said that my voice put her to sleep. Apparently, it is quite somnambulant at times. And she suggested, can we try moving this to the morning? So we did. And that's where we've been now for years. And she has not yet, in the morning prayers, fallen asleep when I was the one doing the praying.
Well done.
Yes, thank you.
That's good adaptation in the marriage. That's very well done.
It is.
So we know you're an IN little TJ.
Actually, I test now as INFJ.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's your Enneagram?
I don't know. I have tried taking the test. I think I usually come out as a 5.
I would have said 5.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would have guessed a 5 too.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. And then my other question is, are you drinking caffeinated Diet Pepsi now, or are you still on decaf?
Oh, no. Once I got past the campaign, I went back to coffee and Diet Colas, fully caffeinated.
Very good. Very good. I was hoping that you'd been able to reclaim that part of yourself, but Very good. We interviewed John Pavlovitz and had a similar kind of conversation. We said, so here's what we're going to do. What do you want to drink? And he said, well, either, Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi. And I was like, okay, wow. Okay, this is going to be a challenging. First of all, you can't say either one because that's just wrong. So.
Well, and as you know from the book, I talk a little bit about in there why I don't drink anymore, although I am a huge fan of beer and single malt whiskeys, but I haven't had any alcohol since I was 40. The reason is not a matter of because I don't believe in drinking or it's, my faith won't let me, or it's none of those reasons. And I talk about in the book why it is, and I don't want to go into a long story on that, but yeah, it's not either of those things.
Maybe we should just leave it at that, and then that will get our listeners to buy your book, even if they don't care about the rest of it, because they'll want to know that.
Exactly.
They'll want to know, why doesn't he drink? What? Yeah. That's weird. Let's go find out what that is,
It is. So. Turn straight to the self-care chapter, and I think that's where you'll find it.
Exactly. Anything else you want to share with us, Tim?
No, just that I appreciate that you have taken the time to talk to me. It's great talking to the both of you. And the both of you, my dad grew up on a ranch, and so we say phrases like that. We also say phrases like there ain't a horse that can't be rode and a cowboy that can't be throwed. So
I like it.
And that's why you're in the Central Valley. Okay.
Although I grew up, I was born in San Francisco and grew up in the shadow of the city. I grew up in Pacifica.
Nice.
Yeah. And
wow.
And so I'm very much an urban and suburban person in growing up. I just somehow landed here.
It's the Davis thing.
Yeah, which has its own vibe going on. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
All the best with everything you're doing. Thanks. You so much.
All righty.